New York, 1946. World War II had just ended. Life was resuming. Sports could once again take center stage. In the mid-20th century, baseball held a special place in the American landscape. With its long, sun-soaked season and deep-rooted traditions, the national pastime captivated crowds more than any other sport. When winter arrived and the bats were stored away, ice hockey often took over the public's attention. Professional American football wouldn't experience its meteoric rise until the late 1950s. In the Midwest and the East Coast, home to the vast majority of Americans, hockey was the perfect pastime to endure the harsh winters. As ice rinks grew larger and more modern, a group of hockey franchise owners gathered in New York with an unusual idea. Instead of leaving their arenas empty for most of the year, why not host basketball games? At the time, the sport was relatively unknown and was played in aging venues or local gyms. With little knowledge of the orange ball, the owners took action. On June 6, 1946, the Basketball Association of America, BAA, was founded. Fittingly, given hockey's dominance, the first game of this new basketball league took place at Toronto's Maple Leaf Gardens. The matchup? The newly formed Toronto Huskies against the New York Knickerbockers. The Knicks won by 2 points in front of a packed crowd of 7,000 spectators. But this success would be short-lived. In a country enthralled by ice hockey, basketball faded as quickly as it had arrived. In just one season, the Toronto Huskies lost what would be equivalent to a staggering $1.3 million today. A year after its inception, the team shut down. By 1950, the BAA rebranded itself as the NBA. And yes, the very first game of the Great League was played in Toronto, Canada. Fast forward to 1984. A small step for humanity, a giant leap for the NBA. What started in half-empty arenas had now blossomed into a national phenomenon. Little by little, baseball and ice hockey were losing their prestige. Alongside the all-powerful NFL stood the NBA, a league that was growing at an unstoppable pace. The newly appointed commissioner, David Stern, capitalized on his charismatic players to take the league global. Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley. After the 1992 Olympics, these names were known across the world. Something unimaginable just a few decades earlier. Yes, America had once again created a product that could electrify crowds. But what about its friendly neighbor to the north? Aside from the National Hockey League, no major sports league had seriously attempted to expand into the land of maple syrup. The reasons were plenty. Harsh winters make travel to stadiums difficult, a less consumer-driven audience, a weak Canadian dollar, and most importantly, a major hurdle. Would American players be willing to live in snowy Canada? In the early 1970s, Major League Baseball took the plunge. After extensive negotiations, a professional franchise, the Montreal Expos, was established in Quebec. They were joined 8 years later by the Toronto Blue Jays, the only remaining Canadian MLB team today. Basketball had not completely disappeared from Canada. In the early 70s, the Buffalo Braves, who would become the Los Angeles Clippers, played a handful of games in Toronto. Always strategic, David Stern kept a close eye on a possible long-term expansion into Canada. Toronto seems like a sure bet. The market is strong, and the demand for basketball is there. The exhibition games played in Toronto were a massive success, convincing the NBA to establish a team in Canada's largest city. But just as the league was preparing its move, an unexpected candidate emerged: Vancouver.
I mean, I don't think a lot of people knew a lot about Vancouver back in the 90s. Toronto was actually in a bid, looking to bid for an NBA team first. And at that time, we had the Vancouver Canucks here. They were transferring they're looking to transfer into a bigger stadium downtown. And so the owner, Arthur Griffiths, was building what's known as Rogers Arena today. It was called Jam Place. And he realized that he needed two tenants. Like, it'd be better if there were actually two tenants and not just the Vancouver Canucks. And so the NBA decided to expand into two cities and not just one. So that's how Vancouver ended up getting an NBA team. We had to meet a lot of demands. I think we had to finish building a new stadium. There was a $125 million cost attached to the team, and we had to sell 12,500 season tickets before opening day. So all those three requirements had to be met before we were given a team.
If the NBA was going to expand to Canada, why not go all in? The league decided to establish not just one, but two franchises north of the US border: the Toronto Raptors and the Vancouver Grizzlies. With a brand new arena and a growing population, Vancouver had successfully made its case to the NBA. In 1995, a new franchise made a spectacular debut: the Vancouver Grizzlies. With their flashy colors and incredible logo, the team immediately captured the attention of the local crowd.
Yeah, it was exciting. It was super exciting. It was the first time the NBA came to Vancouver. It was sort of, Vancouver back then, or even still now today, is kind of known as a hockey city. So it was like being introduced to a new sport, to a new league. But I think Vancouver fell in love with the team right away. I mean, I loved going to games. I went to games as a kid. I was 6 years old, and it was just so cool to have NBA basketball here in Vancouver. You do your homework, you get to go to games after school. And I think a lot of kids like me really fell in love with the team.
Tonight, it's Vancouver's open house. They host the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Showtime in Vancouver.
Just 116's just right here, sir.
It's game time. Time to get serious.
The 1995-96 NBA season kicked off, and Vancouver was buzzing with excitement. Typically, new franchises struggle in their early years, but what if the Grizzlies could defy expectations? Incredibly, the team won its first two games, and the people of Vancouver started believing in a dream start. Unfortunately, that dream quickly turned into a nightmare. After their initial two victories, the Vancouver Grizzlies went on to lose a historic 9 straight games. They ended their inaugural season with 67 losses, the worst record in the entire league. Over the next 5 years, the team never achieved a win percentage higher than 28%. Contrary to what one might think, the Grizzlies' complete failure wasn't necessarily due to a series of poor decisions. In their very first draft, the franchise selected a player with a mysterious career trajectory: Brian Reeves. Nicknamed Big Country, this Oklahoma-born center had made waves in the college circuit. Standing at 7 feet tall and weighing 290 pounds, Reeves had an imposing presence on the court and was expected to dominate the NBA. Averaging 21.5 points per game at Oklahoma State University, he arrived in Vancouver with the label of a future star.
Big country. Guards that don't play defense, they always tell bigs to show. So I would show, and Big Country be 15 feet away, and I would have to rotate back. And he had the ugliest Duckworth one-hand jumper. He shoot it and always go in. And so halftime, I'm looking at the stats. Shaq 15, Big Country 26. I'm like, man.
Though solid on the court, Brian Reeves' career took a tragic turn. Constantly battling weight issues and injuries, he also struggled with the spotlight. Lacking charisma, he dreamed of only one thing: returning to his quiet Oklahoma roots. He ultimately retired 6 years after being drafted, slipping into obscurity and settling into a life as a farmer with his family. In 1996, the Grizzlies drafted talented forward Sharif Abdur-Rahim, who went on to have a respectable NBA career. However, in his first season with Vancouver, the team posted a dreadful record of 14 wins and 68 losses. Seeking a playmaker, the franchise drafted point guard Mike Bibby with a second overall pick in 1998. While he never became a superstar, Bibby later developed into a highly reliable player at his position. However, in his rookie year, the Grizzlies once again finished at the bottom of their conference. 1999 marked the climax of this tragic saga. While the Raptors had found their franchise sensation in Vince Carter, the Grizzlies hoped to follow suit by selecting Steve Francis with the second overall pick. Yet, the highly skilled point guard was completely stunned when he heard his name called by the Canadian team. Citing God's will, Francis did everything in his power to avoid playing for the Grizzlies, and he succeeded. He was traded to Houston immediately after the draft, a humiliating rejection for Vancouver. Year after year, the team sank lower in the standings, and the Grizzlies arena grew emptier. Just a few seasons after their founding, the franchise was already on the brink of collapse.
Every year, we kind of kept getting bounced around from new owner to new owner when, local owner Arthur Griffiths lost control of the team, and we began to be owned by Americans. I think there was frustration within the Grizzlies community just because we weren't sure as the years went on whether or not there was always talk about the team moving.
Fans have been really supportive of the team, and the owners are falsely accusing them of not being supportive of the team. So
Keep the Grizzlies in Vancouver. Come on, save our Grizzlies.
It was hit 20 from downtown this year. 20 of the... Oh! The lob.
The Toronto Raptors overcame early struggles and finally made the playoffs in 2000. Their Ontario counterparts had found their franchise player in Vince Carter. But as the Raptors soared, the Grizzlies were heading straight for disaster.
Yeah, there's two really big factors. The first one is the ownership was a bit different. The Toronto Raptors were owned by the Toronto Teachers Pension Fund, so they had a more solid financial backing than the Vancouver Grizzlies. When both franchises kind of struggled, they both faced the same struggles financially due to the low Canadian dollar. The Toronto Raptors were able to ride that storm out way easier than the Grizzlies because they had the Teachers Pension Fund to back them up, and we didn't. So that's the first thing that people don't know, and that's huge. The second thing is Vince Carter. They just got lucky with the lucky draft pick. If you look back at the draft picks, I can argue that each draft pick that the Grizzlies chose was a good choice, and it just so happened that they just lucked out with Vince Carter.
6th season played, a catastrophic record. The charade had gone on long enough. Usually a visionary, the NBA had completely miscalculated in bringing a team to Vancouver. After a dreadful 2001 season, the Grizzlies were already packing their bags. In their half-empty arena, fans sarcastically thanked them for being the worst team of all time.
And so I think it was really difficult for fans when the team moved, but it happened so quickly. It happened so quickly without a real explanation of why the team left. I think it was a big blow to the community. It was heartbreaking.
Just 6 years after its creation, the franchise was gone. On June 3rd, 2001, it was officially announced that the team would relocate to Memphis, Tennessee. To this day, many young basketball fans have no idea that the Vancouver Grizzlies ever existed. The failure of the franchise can be attributed, first and foremost, to a team that wasn't necessarily terrible on paper, but was completely incapable of delivering results on the court. More importantly, the Grizzlies failed to draft a star who could energize the fan base. Not all the blame falls on the team itself, though. The NBA made a fatal mistake by either arriving in Vancouver too soon or leaving too early. Indeed, with the rise of new technologies, Vancouver experienced rapid growth in the years following the departure of the Grizzlies. A wealthy city with a large Asian community, often passionate about basketball, Vancouver could have been a sustainable market for the NBA.
I think in retrospect, I wish we had a team in Vancouver right now. I think that we do have regret. I think we were a bit ahead of our time. I think there was a moment in the league where prospects seemed down in terms of the team. Attendance was down, ratings were down. So I understood from an economic standpoint why the then team owner wanted to move the team. And unfortunately, we're not in expansion mode right now. But sure, over time, I mean, given the development of the sport in Canada, there's no doubt that at some point we'll look to see whether there's an opportunity to put a second team in the country. There's no doubt that, based on what we're seeing now in terms of the interest, that we could sustain it in Canada.
So the Grizzlies were made a huge impact in the basketball scene here in Vancouver. Even though they're not here today, you can still see remnants of the traces, and the seeds that they planted have really blossomed today. And it's because of the Vancouver Grizzlies. They didn't win a ton of games, and they might have just been here for six years, but I think their impact was deeply felt, and you can still see that in the city.
Though they left in relative indifference, the Vancouver Grizzlies have slowly made their way back into the hearts of Canadian fans. While it remains unlikely at the moment, a potential return of the league to Vancouver can't be ruled out in the future. However, the scars from the Grizzlies' years still linger. There's no doubt that bringing the NBA back to Vancouver will require someone with a lot of ice in their veins.